The loudest room in Silverpine Hall belonged to the one child who could not speak. Hundreds of wolves stood beneath crystal lamps and white pine banners, their polished boots lined along the marble floor, their velvet sleeves brushing as they leaned close to whisper. The welcoming ceremony for the Alpha King of the Northern Territories had drawn every noble family in the pack, every elder, every unmated heir hoping to be noticed, and every servant ordered to remain invisible at the back wall. Hannah Reed stood there with the other staff, pale hands folded against her gray apron, her white skin almost colorless under the cold light pouring through the high windows. She had been told not to step forward, not to draw attention, not to remind the visiting court that Silverpine kept a rejected Omega among its servants. She understood. People like her were expected to make the room easier by disappearing inside it. At the front of the hall, King Caleb Blackwood stood beside the carved alliance table, tall and still in a black northern cloak, his silver-gray eyes unreadable beneath the shadow of the crown. He had the kind of presence that made conversation shrink without a word. Yet Hannah barely looked at him, because beside the Alpha King stood his son. Prince Noah was smaller than she expected, no more than 7 years old, dressed in a formal navy coat with silver buttons and a white scarf tucked carefully at his throat. His blonde hair had been combed smooth, but his fingers betrayed him. They moved against the fabric of his sleeve in quick, careful signs, so small most of the hall missed them. Hannah did not. She saw the way his right hand opened and closed near his chest. She saw his shoulders tighten when pack leader Warren Hale lifted the Silver Alliance emblem from its cushion and invited him to complete the greeting rite. "Your Highness," Warren said with a smile too bright to be kind, "place your hand upon the crest and honor Silverpine with your welcome." Noah did not move. A ripple passed through the crowd. Someone near the front gave a quiet laugh. Another noble whispered, "The northern heir cannot even answer." Hannah felt the words as if they had brushed her own skin. Noah's fingers moved again, faster this time. Not refusal, not pride. He was saying something. His hand touched his wrist, then pulled back. "Hurts. The emblem hurts." Hannah's breath caught. She had learned sign language years ago for her little brother, Matthew, after a winter fever stole his voice for nearly a year. She knew the difference between silence and emptiness. Noah was not empty. He was trying to be heard in a room full of people listening only for sound. Pack leader Warren's smile tightened. "Perhaps the prince is shy," he said, and a few polite chuckles followed, soft enough to deny, sharp enough to wound. The Alpha King's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly, but he did not yet speak. Maybe he was watching. Maybe he was waiting. Maybe he had spent too long surrounded by people who answered for his son before Noah could answer for himself. Hannah's fingers curled into her apron. She could stay where she was. She could obey. She could let the moment pass the way every cruel moment passed for people without rank. But Noah looked down at the silver crest again, his breathing quickening, his small hand signing the same word no one saw. "Hurts." And Hannah, rejected or not, could not pretend she had not understood. Hannah had once believed that being chosen would make the world gentler. She was 18 when her first mate bond appeared, faint and golden, tying her heart to Ethan Cole, the future beta of Silverpine. For 3 days, she had walked through the pack house with a secret warmth inside her, imagining a life where she would no longer stand at the edges of rooms or wait for someone to remember her name. Then Ethan rejected her in front of the moon altar because an Omega with no family title could not help him rise. He had said the words politely. That made them worse. The pack had not shouted. They had simply adjusted around her, placing her lower, speaking to her less, giving her work that kept her hands busy and her face out of sight. Rejected did not always mean banished. Sometimes it meant being kept close enough to serve and far enough away to never belong. Years passed that way. Hannah moved into the small room behind the laundry, where the walls smelled of soap and winter damp. She woke before sunrise to light stoves, fold towels, mend children's coats, and scrub the great hall until the marble reflected faces that never looked down to thank her. She learned which elders liked their tea cooled for exactly 2 minutes, which pups cried when thunder rolled over the mountain, which servants hid sore wrists beneath their sleeves because asking for help could cost them work. Her kindness became quiet because loud kindness was often mistaken for ambition. The only person who had ever needed her loudly was her younger brother, Matthew. He had lost his voice after a hard winter fever when he was 6, not forever, but long enough for the world to grow impatient with him. Adults spoke over him. Children teased him. Even healers described him as if he were not sitting right there, watching their mouths move around his life. Hannah had refused to let silence become a cage for him. She borrowed a worn sign language book from a traveling teacher, practiced by candlelight after chores, and taught Matthew one sign at a time. Hungry, tired, scared, happy, stop, please help. The first time he signed sister, Hannah cried into her pillow where no one could see. Matthew's voice eventually returned, softer than before, but real. Hannah kept the language. She kept it because some people were never heard unless someone chose to learn how they spoke. Now, years later, in Silverpine Hall, she watched Prince Noah stand before a silver crest that made his small hand tremble, and memory rose inside her with painful clarity. The room saw a royal child failing a ceremony. Hannah saw a boy asking for help in the only language his fear could reach. Her place was at the back wall. Her orders were clear. Warren Hale had warned every servant that morning that one wrong movement during the royal welcome would bring shame on Silverpine. Ethan Cole stood near the front now in a dark formal coat, older, polished, respected, his gaze sliding over Hannah as if she were part of the furniture he had once chosen not to keep. She felt the old wound, but it did not rule her. Noah signed again. Hurts. Please. The second sign was smaller, almost hidden against his sleeve, but it found Hannah across the hall like a lantern in fog. She took one breath, then another. The marble beneath her shoes felt as cold as judgment. She thought of Matthew at 6 years old, hands shaking while adults guessed wrong around him. She thought of every quiet person the world had called difficult because listening required effort. Then Hannah stepped out of the servant line. The first step Hannah took sounded impossibly loud to her own ears. It was only one shoe against marble, then another, but Silverpine Hall reacted as if a bell had cracked through the ceremony. Whispers thinned into silence. Faces turned. A servant girl leaving the back wall was not part of the ritual, and a rejected Omega entering the royal space was almost unthinkable. Hannah felt every stare settle on her gray apron, her modest dress, her pale hands held carefully where everyone could see them. She did not look at Ethan. She did not look at pack leader Warren Hale. She looked only at Prince Noah, because the boy had begun to withdraw into himself, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the silver crest as if it were a winter animal waiting to bite. The crest itself rested on a blue velvet cushion at the center of the alliance table, polished bright beneath the crystal lamps. It was beautiful in the way dangerous things could be beautiful, all engraved wolves and sharp northern lines, its surface gleaming with cold ceremonial silver. Hannah understood at once why it hurt him. Some children with sensitive wolf blood could feel silver even when it was only near them, not enough to harm, but enough to make the skin prickle, the bones remember danger, the breath turn shallow. Noah was not refusing honor. He was trying to endure it while the adults measured him against a script written for children who could speak through pain. Hannah Reed, Warren said, his voice low with warning. Return to your place. She stopped several feet from the prince, not close enough to crowd him, not far enough to abandon him. The hall seemed to lean forward. Noah looked at her for the first time, really looked, and the fear in his blue eyes tightened something inside her chest. He had the face of a child trained to be watched, but not understood. Hannah lowered herself slowly to one knee, not in submission to the nobles, but to bring her hands below his line of sight, where he could read them without lifting his chin. She did not speak at first. She signed, carefully and simply. Do you want help? Noah froze. The change was so small most of the room missed it, but Hannah saw it. The quick inhale, the widening of his eyes, the fragile disbelief of a child discovering that someone had finally answered the door he had been knocking on. His fingers moved against his sleeve. You know? Hannah nodded once. A murmur broke behind her. Warren's face hardened. This is inappropriate. Hannah kept her gaze on Noah. She signed again. I will not touch you. I can help with the crest. Is that all right? Noah looked from her hands to the silver emblem, then toward his father. King Caleb Blackwood stood motionless, his expression carved from northern ice, but his eyes were sharper now, fixed not on Hannah's rank, but on his son's hands. Noah swallowed and signed a single word. Please. Hannah rose just enough to reach the servant cloth folded over her arm. the one she had carried all morning for polishing glass. It was clean, plain white cotton, nothing ceremonial, nothing important. She held it up for Noah to see, then pointed gently toward the crest and waited for his approval. Noah nodded. Only then did Hannah step closer to the alliance table. She wrapped the cotton around the cold silver emblem, covering the polished surface without hiding its shape, turning pain into something bearable without changing the rite itself. "There," she said softly, because some words were for the room and some were for courage. "You can still honor them. You do not have to hurt to do it." Noah stared at the covered crest. Slowly, with the whole hall watching, he placed his small hand on the cloth. The gesture was silent, formal, perfect. The alliance lamps flared gold above the table. For one breath, no one moved. The rite had been completed not by command, not by shame, but by being understood. Hannah stepped back immediately, giving Noah space, but the prince reached out and caught the edge of her sleeve with 2 fingers. The hall saw that. The Alpha King saw it too. The gold flare above the alliance table should have ended the matter. It should have given Silverpine a graceful way to breathe, to smile, to pretend the ceremony had always been meant to unfold this way. Instead, pride moved faster than gratitude. Pack leader Warren Hale looked at the covered crest, then at Noah's fingers still holding Hannah's sleeve, and shame sharpened his face into something cold. "Remove her from the royal space," he said. The words struck the hall with quiet force. Hannah felt Noah's grip tighten, just enough to pull a wrinkle into the fabric. She did not move. She did not pull away. She simply turned her wrist so the boy could hold the sleeve more comfortably, a small adjustment that somehow felt braver than stepping forward had. "Pack leader," one elder murmured, "the rite is complete." Warren's smile returned, but it had no warmth left in it. "The rite is complete despite her interruption, not because of it." The crowd accepted the sentence too easily, as crowds often did when authority offered them a path away from discomfort. A few nobles nodded. Someone whispered that Omegas should never be allowed near royal children. Another voice muttered that a rejected girl would do anything to be seen. Hannah kept her eyes down, but every word found a place in her. She had learned not to flinch. Flinching made people feel powerful. Then Ethan Cole stepped forward from the line of Silverpine officers, handsome in his dark formal coat, his expression arranged into concern that did not reach his eyes. "Leader Hale is right to be cautious," Ethan said. "Hannah has always been emotional. She means well, but she confuses kindness with entitlement." The old wound opened quietly, not with the bright pain of rejection, but with the dull ache of being described by someone who had once been close enough to know better. Hannah could have answered. She could have reminded the hall that Ethan had rejected her not because she was dangerous, but because she was inconvenient. She could have asked why the first person to understand Noah was the first person they wanted removed. But Noah's fingers were still on her sleeve, and his hand had begun to tremble again. So Hannah chose him over her own defense. She lowered herself back to one knee beside him, keeping her body turned slightly so the crowd felt farther away from his small frame. With her free hand, she signed where only he could easily see. "You did well." Noah blinked hard. His signs came back unevenly. "They are angry." Hannah nodded, keeping her face calm though her heart hurt for him. "Not because of you." His eyes searched hers, hungry for the truth adults so often softened into lies. Hannah signed again. "You were clear." They did not listen. Across the table, King Caleb Blackwood watched every movement. The hall believed his silence meant approval, or perhaps royal distance. Hannah knew better the moment she risked a glance at him. His silver-gray eyes were not distant. They were gathering storm by storm, measuring each voice, each accusation, each person who had looked at his son and seen embarrassment instead of courage. Warren took a step closer. "Your Majesty, allow Silverpine to correct this breach. The girl will be dismissed from service by morning." Noah's hand left Hannah's sleeve. For one awful second, she thought he was withdrawing. Instead, the prince stepped closer to her, small but deliberate, and placed himself at her side. Gasps traveled through the hall. Noah lifted his hands, signing with the careful dignity of a child who had been ignored too long. "She helped me." Most of Silverpine did not understand. Hannah did. So did the Alpha King. Ethan's mouth tightened. The prince is overwhelmed. He cannot be expected to know what is best in this moment. That was when King Caleb Blackwood finally moved. Not much. Only one step down from the raised dais. But the entire hall went still, because the north had shifted its weight, and every wolf in the room felt it. King Caleb Blackwood descended one step, and the silence that followed made every whisper before it feel careless. Hannah stayed on one knee beside Noah, her hands still visible, her breathing careful and shallow. She had seen powerful men move through rooms before. Ethan had done it with charm. Warren Hale did it with rank. But the Alpha King moved like winter itself, quiet, certain, impossible to ignore. His black cloak shifted over his shoulders as he came down from the dais, and the silver clasps at his collar caught the lamplight like pieces of moon. Noah stood very still at Hannah's side, but he did not retreat. That alone changed the air. Caleb stopped before the alliance table, his gaze resting first on the cloth-covered crest. "Who prepared the emblem?" he asked. Warren blinked, surprised by the question. "Our ceremonial attendants, Your Majesty. Were they told my son is sensitive to silver?" Warren's smile faltered. "We were told the prince is selective with certain materials, but the alliance crest is traditional." Caleb's eyes lifted. Tradition does not excuse carelessness. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Warren bowed his head, but his pride resisted even as his posture obeyed. "Of course, Your Majesty." Still, the servant acted without permission. Ethan stepped closer, perhaps hoping to recover favor. Her history with rejection has made her eager to prove herself. It is understandable, but not suitable for a royal ceremony. Hannah felt heat rise behind her eyes. She kept them lowered. The cruelest part was how reasonable Ethan sounded, how easily he turned her compassion into neediness. Noah's small hand moved. Hannah caught it from the corner of her eye. He was signing again, sharper now. "No." She helped. Caleb saw it too. For the first time, he answered his son in the same language, his large hands moving with controlled precision. "I know." A soft shock passed through the hall. Nobles who had spent the afternoon speaking around Noah now stared as their king spoke to him without sound. Noah's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough for hope to appear where fear had been. Caleb turned to Hannah. "Did you know my son before today?" "No, Your Majesty," Hannah said. "Did anyone instruct you to approach him?" "No, Your Majesty." "Then why did you?" The answer should have been dangerous. Hannah knew that. But the hall had already judged her for ambition, for interruption, for daring to see what others missed. There was nothing left to protect except the truth. "Because he asked for help," she said softly. Warren's brows tightened. He said nothing. Hannah lifted her eyes then, not to challenge him, but because Noah deserved better than another adult erasing him. "He did." The hall stirred. Caleb's gaze sharpened. "How?" Hannah turned slightly toward Noah and signed, with slow, careful hands. "May I tell them?" Noah watched her, then nodded. Only then did Hannah face the king again. He signed that the crest hurt. Then he signed please. A long breath moved through the room, the uncomfortable kind that follows truth when too many people have ignored it. Caleb looked at his son. Noah repeated the signs, smaller this time, but steady. "Hurts. Please." The Alpha King's face remained composed, yet something in the room grew colder around the edges. He looked over the nobles, the elders, the officers, and finally Ethan. "My son spoke," he said. A rejected Omega was the only one respectful enough to listen. Warren opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Ethan looked away first. Hannah felt Noah's fingers brush her sleeve again, no longer desperate, only present. For the first time since stepping from the servant line, she felt the floor beneath her stop tilting. Caleb turned back to the pack leader. "You called this a breach." His voice was calm enough to make every person lean in. "I call it the completion of a rite Silverpine nearly failed." The phrase settled over Silverpine Hall like a verdict no one had prepared to hear. The completion of a rite Silverpine nearly failed. Hannah felt those words move through the room, changing the shape of every stare on her back. A moment ago, she had been the servant who crossed a line. Now she was the reason the ceremony still had honor. She did not know how to stand inside that truth. Her whole life had taught her to shrink away from attention, to survive by giving people less of herself to target. But Noah remained at her side, small and steady, his fingers lightly holding her sleeve as if her presence made the room less sharp. Caleb looked down at him, and the cold authority in his face eased by one almost invisible degree. He signed to his son again. Are you all right? Noah looked at the covered crest, then at Hannah, then back to his father. His hands moved slowly. I was scared. She asked me. The simplicity of it broke something open in the hall. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the lowered eyes of elders who had watched the boy struggle and called it shyness. In the stiff posture of officers who had mistaken silence for weakness. In Warren Hale's face as he realized the prince had not failed the rite at all. The room had failed the prince. Hannah swallowed, her throat tight. She wanted to tell Noah he had done nothing wrong. But this was his moment, not hers. So she waited. Caleb seemed to understand that waiting could be a form of respect. He did not answer for his son. He did not touch him without permission. He only bent slightly, bringing his tall frame closer to Noah's height, and signed with deliberate care. Thank you for telling me. Noah's eyes widened. Then he nodded once, the smallest gesture, yet it carried more trust than any spoken promise. Warren cleared his throat. Your Majesty, Silverpine meant no disrespect. We were unaware the prince was communicating through formal signs. Caleb straightened. Unaware because you did not look. The words were clean, controlled, and impossible to soften. Warren bowed, color rising in his cheeks. Ethan shifted near the officers, his polished confidence beginning to crack under the weight of the room's attention. He glanced at Hannah, and for the first time in years, she saw uncertainty instead of dismissal. It gave her no pleasure, only distance. The wound he had made still existed, but it no longer defined the whole landscape of her life. Caleb turned toward the nearest attendant. Bring another cloth. The crest will remain covered for any royal child or guest who requires it. The attendant hurried to obey. Then Caleb looked at the full hall. A tradition that cannot make room for a child's safety is not honor. It is pride wearing ceremony. The alliance lamps flickered warmly above them, as if agreeing. Hannah's knees ached from kneeling, but she stayed still until Noah tugged her sleeve and signed a question. Stand. She gave him a gentle smile and rose slowly. The hall watched her stand not as an interruption now, but as someone the prince had asked to remain. Caleb's gaze followed the exchange, sharp and quiet. Then he asked Hannah, will you stand beside my son until the welcome rite concludes? A tremor passed through her. Servants did not stand beside princes. Rejected Omegas did not stand in royal space. But Noah was looking at her, waiting, and no part of his trust felt like a burden. If Prince Noah wants me to, she said. Noah signed immediately. Please stay. Hannah bowed her head. Then I will. Caleb gave a single nod. Around them, Silverpine Hall adjusted again, but this time the adjustment did not push Hannah backward. It made space. The welcome rite continued, but it no longer belonged to the people who had planned it. Hannah stood beside Prince Noah at the alliance table while the hall watched with a cautious stillness, as if kindness had become a language they were only beginning to understand. The fresh cloth arrived, softer and thicker than the first, and Caleb himself placed it over the silver crest before looking to his son. Noah glanced up at Hannah, not asking her to speak for him, only checking that she was still there. She signed softly, you can choose. Noah touched the covered emblem, then signed to his father. Better. Caleb answered with a small nod, and the lamps above the table glowed gold again, warm across the marble, warm across the faces of wolves who had expected embarrassment and were now witnessing dignity. Warren Hale recited the final oath with a careful voice, each word polished but less confident than before. Hannah listened without pride, without triumph. She was too aware of the strange weight of standing in a place she had been forbidden to approach. Yet Noah's calm steadied her. Every few moments, his hand moved with a question or a feeling, and each time, Hannah answered only after he looked to her. Tired. Almost done. Too many people. I know. You are doing well. Across the table, Caleb watched them with an intensity that made Hannah's pulse feel uneven. He was not watching the way others did, searching for flaws or reasons to send her back to the laundry. He watched as if each small exchange revealed a truth he had been standing beside for years without fully seeing. When the oath ended, the hall should have applauded. Instead, silence came first, not empty this time, but humbled. Then a few servants lowered their heads to Noah in respect. An elder followed. One by one, the gesture spread until the hall bowed not only to the Alpha King, but to the quiet prince who had completed the rite in his own voice. Noah's eyes widened. His fingers brushed Hannah's sleeve again. They see me, he signed. Hannah's chest tightened. Yes, she signed back. They do. But the fragile peace did not last. Ethan stepped forward with a bow that looked respectful enough to hide its bitterness. Your Majesty, with permission, Silverpine should still review how a servant came to know royal communication methods. Such access could be misused. Hannah felt the room shift again, old suspicion trying to reclaim its seat. Warren did not stop him. A few nobles lifted their heads. Caleb's face became very still. Noah's hand tightened on the edge of the table, and Hannah saw his shoulders draw inward. So she stepped half a pace back, giving him room, refusing to make herself the center even as accusations circled her name. I learned from my brother, she said quietly. He lost his voice for a time when we were children. Ethan's smile thinned. Convenient. The word was soft, but it carried. Hannah lowered her eyes for one breath, then lifted them again, not to Ethan, but to the king. No, sir. It was difficult. That is why I remembered. Something in Caleb's gaze sharpened. The hall felt the change before he spoke. He turned fully toward Ethan, toward Warren, toward every person waiting to see whether rank could still overpower the truth they had just witnessed. The Alpha King said one word. Enough. It did not echo. It did not need to. It settled into Silverpine Hall like winter closing over a restless lake, and every whisper stopped at once. The single word changed the room more completely than any raised voice could have. Ethan's mouth closed. Warren Hale lowered his eyes. The nobles who had been leaning toward fresh gossip straightened as if the marble beneath their feet had turned to ice. Hannah felt the silence pass over her, but for the first time in years, it did not feel like abandonment. It felt like space. Caleb Blackwood looked across Silverpine Hall with the cold patience of a king who had allowed the truth to reveal itself and would not allow pride to bury it again. This child completed your rite, he said, his hand moving briefly toward Noah before returning to stillness. This woman helped him do so without taking his voice from him. Anyone who calls that ambition has forgotten the meaning of honor. Hannah's breath caught, not because he defended her, though that alone felt impossible, but because he named what she had tried so hard to protect. Noah's voice, not sound, not speech, not a performance for adults, but his right to be understood. Caleb turned slightly toward his son and signed in clear, steady movements. Do you want her to stay through the reception? Noah did not hesitate. Yes, please. The hall watched the exchange in stunned quiet. Hannah saw a few nobles glance at one another, realizing too late that the king had always known his son's language. Perhaps he had not always known how to make the world respect it, but he knew. That mattered. Caleb faced her then. Hannah Reed, will you remain as my son's interpreter for the evening, by his request, and under my protection? The words under my protection moved through the room like a shield unfolding. Hannah felt the old instinct to step back, to refuse before anyone could accuse her of reaching too high. But Noah was looking at her with careful hope, and she remembered Matthew's hands signing sister in candlelight, remembered how one learned word had opened a whole world for a frightened boy. Yes, Your Majesty, she said softly. If Prince Noah wants me there, I will stay. Noah's face brightened in the smallest way, and Hannah answered with a gentle sign. I am here. The reception resumed in a different shape. Silverpine's musicians played a quiet northern melody. Servants carried trays around the hall, moving slower than usual, eyes flicking toward Hannah as she stood beside Noah near the alliance table. This time, when elders approached to offer greetings, Caleb required them to wait until Noah looked ready. Hannah interpreted only what he chose to say. Thank you. Welcome. Too loud. Need a moment. Each signed phrase became a small act of dignity made visible. The room learned, awkwardly and imperfectly, that silence was not absence. At one point, Mrs. Vale, an older servant from the kitchens, passed near Hannah with a tray and whispered, You did good, child. Hannah almost smiled. It felt unfamiliar, but not wrong. Across the room, Ethan watched her with an expression she could no longer read, and for once, she did not try. His rejection had once been the loudest word in her life. Tonight, it had become background noise. Near the tall windows, moonlight slipped through the frosted glass and touched Hannah's wrist where her hand rested at her side. A faint silver mark appeared there, delicate as a crescent drawn beneath the skin. Noah noticed first. His eyes widened, and he signed one word. Moon. Caleb turned at once. The moment his gaze found the mark, the cold stillness in his face changed. Not broken, not softened fully. Recognizing. Somewhere beneath crown and duty, his wolf went silent, then bowed its head as if answering an ancient call. The silver crescent on Hannah's wrist glowed brighter beneath the moonlit window, so delicate it should have been easy to dismiss, yet no one in Silverpine Hall dared to look away. Noah reached for her hand, then paused, remembering the respect she had shown him first. Hannah saw the question in his eyes and nodded. Only then did he touch the edge of the mark with one careful finger. The light warmed, not like fire, but like a quiet promise remembered by the blood. Noah signed slowly, "Moon hears you." Hannah did not understand the old meaning, but Caleb did. The Alpha King stood very still, his silver-gray eyes fixed on the crescent as the northern lamps flickered gold above them. "Silent Moon Bond," he said, barely above a whisper, yet the words carried. Elder Miriam, the oldest wolf in Silverpine, drew in a shaken breath. That sign has not appeared in generations. Warren Hale looked as if the floor had shifted under him. Ethan stepped back into the line of officers, his face pale with the knowledge that the woman he had called unworthy had just been named by something older than rank. Hannah wanted to pull her sleeve down, not from shame, but from the sudden weight of being seen by an entire hall. Caleb noticed. Before the attention could become another kind of cage, he moved. He removed the black northern cloak from his shoulders and settled it around Hannah with careful hands, not touching more than the fabric required. The cloak was warm, heavy, and edged in dark fur, falling over her gray servant dress like night sheltering a candle. "Hannah Reed stands under the protection of the Northern Throne," Caleb said. "She will not be mocked for listening. She will not be punished for kindness. She will not be called broken in my presence again." The hall bowed, not all at once, but in waves, pride surrendering slowly to truth. Hannah stood beside Noah with the king's cloak around her shoulders and the crescent fading softly into her skin. For years, rejection had been the word that followed her through doorways, kitchens, laundry rooms, and cold servant corridors. Tonight, another word rose to meet it. "Hurt." Noah leaned close and signed, "Stay." Hannah's throat tightened. She signed back, "If your father allows it." Caleb watched the exchange, and something unguarded passed through his face, a quiet ache beneath the crown. He signed to Noah first. "She may stay as our honored guest." Then he looked at Hannah. "If she chooses." The choice mattered. It reached her more deeply than any command could have. Hannah looked around the hall, at the nobles who had doubted her, at Warren's lowered head, at Ethan's silence, at the servants whose eyes shone with cautious hope. Then she looked at Noah, the child who had spoken without sound and changed everything because someone finally listened. "I choose to stay tonight," she said softly. Caleb nodded, but his wolf had already answered in the silence between them. Hannah felt it then, a gentle pull beneath her ribs, not ownership, not demand, but recognition. The bond did not crash into her like thunder. It opened like a door in a room she had thought was locked forever. Caleb felt it too. His breath shifted, just once, and his gaze met hers with the stunned restraint of a king who had found something far more dangerous than power: hope. Outside the high windows, snow began to fall over Silverpine, silver under the moon, quiet as a blessing. And in the hall where a mute prince had finally been heard, the rejected Omega stood beside the Alpha King, no longer defined by the man who had cast her aside, but by the mercy she had chosen when no one else was listening.